Welcome to the Distinguished Speaker Series at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. It is an absolute privilege and a pleasure to have Beth Ford join us this evening, or this morning, this evening, wherever you are in the world. And so it's fantastic to have Beth join us. She became the president and CEO of Land O'Lakes in 2018. Among other things, she also sits on the board of the Business Roundtable and is also a director at BlackRock, and has been acknowledged as being one of the finest leaders in the world. In fact, made it on Fortune's World's 50 Greatest Leaders list. And so Beth, welcome. And I'm actually going to want to follow up on that acknowledgement there,
okay.
Which is, I heard you give an interview where you plied your mother with a half a glass of wine and asked her, who's the favorite child among your family of 8 children, and she chose your oldest brother. Like, how can you get a recount? Go back, hey mom,
No.
50 greatest leaders. Can you top that?
She's not so impressed. This is one of the great things about family, right? They keep it grounded. Yeah, my older brother, he's actually my second older brother. He's the second oldest, and he's phenomenal. He was a Navy captain. He went back and he got his PhD in nuclear engineering from, I think, Carnegie Mellon. He was teaching at Harvard. Now he runs, I think he's going to the Princeton labs. He's brilliant, and just such a good man. So when my mom said that, we were all like, Mike is better than us. He's smart. He's a good guy. We like him. He's the guy that if you have a daughter, you want her trotting him home with you.
Okay, well, I still think that you can ask for some kind of recount here, but let's get more serious here and start with the reality that you are a member company. You're a Fortune 250 company, but you're a member company. Can you explain to people why that matters in terms of what it means to be CEO of such a company?
By the way, just today I did an interview with Reid Hoffman on his podcast, and a Masters of Scale. I would recommend everybody who wants to know more about the business in detail, you listen to that. And it was really, he spent a lot of time talking about this. Now, I worked in 6 industries, 7 companies, big corporations, Pepsi, Mobil Oil, and small privates. And this one is a cooperative. It was started 100 years ago by Upper Midwest dairy farmers trying to get power in the channel and get their sweet cream butter in the population centers in the East. That was successful. That's a marketing cooperative. And because that was successful, they decided to form a supply cooperative. All of the animal nutrition items, the crop protection items, because oftentimes farmers will grow their own corn and beans and things like that go into a feed ration. So a supply cooperative, and that was successful. And so from that heritage, this is our 100th anniversary this year. We now go back to, it's like any other business I'm sure that you're familiar with. They went on the waterfront of, we're going to be in live animals. We're going to be in this business, right? They got away from the core. My predecessor brought it back to the core. It's an operating company. And it's about, actually, we'll probably move up in the rankings of, we were 219 and we're having a phenomenal year this year. We're up over 12 to 14% on our top line, and pulling that down into the bottom line, which means our pricing power is significant in the marketplace, and we're able to offset this really challenging cost environment. So why is it important? In a cooperative, if you walked into our headquarters, you would not know this was different than any other business, right? This is a big company at headquarters. I have a couple thousand people, multiple businesses, R&D. We've got all of the functions, everything. The difference is the structure, the capital structure, and the governance structure, really. So the profits we make on our business go back into the pockets of the members. The members are farmers, local retailers, producers. And so when I say a producer, we're not all dairy. Everybody knows our business because they know our butter. Now we say we also make cheese and pudding, get busy with that. But really, we also own Purina. Winfield Technologies that works with growers on their acre. We have a tech business, we have an NGO, and now we have a sustainable production business. So this will be about a $15.5 billion top line. And the difference is the governance structure. The board is made up of farmers or local retailers. They're just going through a governance restructure. So we'll have probably about 20 board members. That's unusually large, although it was 28, so progress. And the board is elected on a regional basis in either ag or dairy, two separate sectors of the business. And then they sit on the board. I always say to them, you start in the House of Representatives, but when you come in here, you're in the administration. Okay, you've got to work on behalf of the collective of the enterprise. You do not need to put, what does it mean for my farm or my region or whatever? That's not how we can have you operate. In terms of the capital structure, we access debt. I do meetings on Wall Street with rating agencies. We have a preferred tranche that acts like equity, but most of it is retained earnings that we made money and we put it back into the business. And so we don't go out into the public markets. We still have SOX compliance requirements. We still do all the things a public company does. And so the difference is the governance structure. And at the same time, if you came in, you wouldn't recognize the difference. The other comment I make is there's an intimacy to this model. And when I say that, I know these farmers, I know their families, I know these local retailers, I'm in these communities. And when we perform well, sometimes we can help them save their businesses, save their farms that have been their family for generations. And so that's that personalization. I know their family, I know their spouse, I know their children, I know their community. And it's an incredibly, it's an incredible responsibility because you know them, right? It's not, we're gonna have a dividend. Here's your dividend yield, right? And this is great. This patronage, this dividend goes back to them and to their family. Our ability to be effective at policy in Washington, D.C. is directly related to the efficacy of their business. Our discussions around trade, around the strength of the dollar, all of those things are so important. And so when I think of it, I think what a privilege, what a responsibility to work on behalf of these members, these farmers. And they try not to advantage themselves at the expense of another in this collective.
So going back to that you sit on the board of the Business Roundtable. The Business Roundtable got a lot of publicity around this shift from kind of shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. But from your point of view, what I've heard you say is, well, it couldn't be more obvious that that's what we need to be doing given where I sit with Land O'Lakes.
Yeah, I try to resist talking about everybody else's business, but I will tell you, it is the very model of what Land O'Lakes says. Sometimes I'll hold profit at the farm level because, and although I know I could take pricing, meaning the price of milk, for instance, at a farm gate is directly related to the way I might pull the levers on financials and say, I'm going to give you this premium in addition to your regular pricing. But sometimes I'll hold that profit because I know that they need more liquidity or more of an opportunity to drive a profit at the farm level. And that's comfortable for me because this is a cooperative. I don't have to have all the earnings come into the enterprise. And at the same time, you talk about stakeholder capitalism in the communities. And I say it must be difficult to be an effective farmer, an effective business person, if you're in a deteriorating environment, right? Your kid doesn't have a good school. You have no access to healthcare. Rural hospitals have shut down. 78% of the counties that index as food insecure in America are in rural America. And so we need to think about this. And this is not a monolith. This isn't just the upper Midwest. We're everywhere. But, some of the most, every state has a rural area. And many of the most challenged rural areas in the Southeast and minority communities, we work, we have operations and businesses there as well. So the opportunity is to make an impact with our business, but also with our policy in the things that we'll do. I'm sure we'll talk about the leverage of technology as an enabler to stabilize these communities. What a great opportunity to change the narrative and to remind everybody, as I say, there is a shared destiny between rural and urban America, and we seem to have forgotten that. You know, where do we think the food is coming from? And 44% of the military comes from rural America, and 19% of the population is there. So these are communities making an investment in our security. Food security is national security, and they make a direct impact for all of us.
So clearly you have a sense of purpose and passion. And so you're going to find I'm a very nonlinear questioner here. So I'm going to try to tap into where does this passion and purpose come from, taking you back to your childhood, where you had many jobs as a child. I guess famously your first job was detasseling corn. You're like slicing the tip off. Is that what you're doing, or
taking the tassel off? You know, again, it's if I get into that, that is kind of automated these days. If you're from the Midwest, you'll know, detasseling corn. It's farm work. I also walk the beans, as I say, getting the weeds out of the field. But where does it come from? I came from a large family, 7 siblings. I'm number 5 of 8. I shared a room with my 3 sisters. My dad was a truck driver, and then was a used car salesman when I was growing up. And my mother was a nurse and an RN, and then she was a psychologist who got her master's, and then she's a minister. She'd say, I worked on their body and then their mind and then their spirit, their soul. She's still with us. My father has since passed. But where does it come from? I think, first of all, I try to mention to folks that my upbringing was no different than everybody else in the neighborhood. So I don't ever find it kind of special, but I think when you're from different communities, you're like, oh, wow, that must have been challenging. Well, we were food insecure. We were, I say, well, I got one drawer in my room and that was for my hand-me-downs, And when you're a child, I think first, either you don't see a difference because all your neighbors are like that, went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. And, so going to the day old store for food or for to get some day old cookies, that didn't seem unusual to me. I was in, Catholic grade school, I was at the church basement for the pancake breakfast. As my mom said, when we didn't have the food to feed us, she'd make it like a game. Oh, we're having breakfast for dinner, or hey, good news, we're having popcorn for Sunday dinner. That's what we're having. And so my mom is magic to me. She's an incredibly resilient woman. And so her ability to deal with all of this, still invest in herself. So intellectual curiosity, and then her warmth and her, I guess, passion for helping others. Really, I just found remarkable. She's quite a role model for me. I tell a story frequently of her taking me for Thanksgiving to give a meal to a poorer family, right? A challenged family. I'm thinking, well, we don't have tons, but okay, 11, 12 years old. And I'm with my mom in this apartment where there were 2 kids running around kind of in their underwear, and it's hot. And I see clothes on the heaters, and we leave when she gave this meal to this family, and we leave, and I was like, what's the story with those kids running around in their underwear? She said, well, didn't you see they only have 1 pair of clothing, and it's on that furnace. And I said, oh. And she said, she's smaller. I'm 6 feet tall. She was smaller. I was already taller. She said, do you understand how much you have, what you have been given? Do you understand your responsibility? Do not. Remember where we were standing. I remember what she was wearing. I remember all of that. And to me, it ignites my passion even today. Not for helping yes, for helping others, but to recognize our responsibility for others. I call leadership as a team sport, and I say it as our responsibility to help others.
So, part of what you've said is that as you were younger and taking all these jobs, maybe you didn't love it at the time, but you came to realize that this was an incredible blessing and an advantage. I mean, can you explain how this has been an advantage for you?
Well, first of all, it's helped me have the value of everybody's responsibilities. So I cleaned toilets in college. That's how I made my way through college. I had multiple jobs, and when you're younger and you don't have the right thing to wear, you're kind of embarrassed. And I was like, geez, this is so hard. It's embarrassing. But now I think, gosh, what a blessing. What a blessing. Because now I see the value in everybody's job. I see the responsibility I have as a leader to put out an optimistic, forward-looking view for them. I feel being consistency, telling people I respect them, I respect their work, helping them translate their work every day, whatever it is, on the shop floor, the janitor, whatever, to what our mission is, and telling them how I value them. And I mean that, so it's not about whether you're in my job or whatever, that I'm more valuable than somebody else. We need to lift everybody up and see how connected they are. And so I see that as such a value to me now, not just because I could say, I know how hard it is to work for everything you have. Well, of course I do. But rather, I think of it as what a blessing for me to have firsthand experience, to know how important it is for somebody to recognize you, to put voice and to acknowledge you worked hard today and I appreciate you.
So in terms of kind of moving now into your career, the question of, do I stand out or do I fit in? And as you look at different stages of your career, to kind of put this in context, you would say, well, it was me and 50 dudes. It was me and 25 dudes. And in fact, when you were named CEO, when you had that 28-person board, I think all 28 were men. Mm-hmm. So help us understand, how do you navigate this path where you may be surrounded by people who are very different from you?
Well, when it's me and 25 dudes or me and 50 dudes, I have them just where I want them. I laugh a little bit about it. So first of all, I spent a lot of my career in line operations, ran tanker and barge docks, trucking facilities, manufacturing facilities. And guess what? I wasn't uncomfortable because I told you my father was a truck driver. My uncle was a truck. We were working class people. These were my people. So this does not make me uncomfortable. And no matter what the issue is, male or female, it's about being comfortable with yourself and about making sure that you realize leadership actually is very little to do with you. It's actually to do with everybody else. And what a gift. I didn't think about that when I first joined a C-suite. I was in the C-suite starting when I was 36. And I'm in charge here and I'm the chief supply chain officer and the CEO wants me to do it. And then I realized, well, that's stupid, because I'm not helping them understand how I'm enabling their success. And it really actually was little to do with me. It's everything to do with them. I've got to enable their success. So in terms of, do you want to fit in or stick out or whatever, what I think is you want to enable somebody else's success. There is never a wrong answer there. And all of us have seen this, and I say it, and here you are in your role, your important role, and many of the people on this listening to us will remind themselves of the teamwork that you make as part of Duke. And you say, these team approaches are absolutely critical, right, to business issues. And so we all have been there where you get a teammate and you're like, Joan is on your team. And I was like, oh God, I hate it when I'm with Joan. Joan never gets the work done. Joan's an energy suck. I mean, everything is negative, everything. And I'm always like, don't be Joan. It's simple. Enable somebody else's success. Be a good person, be a good partner, care about them and really mean it. And when you do that, you'd be surprised at the success you can have as a team. You'd be surprised at your own virtuous circle of success for yourself, because then when they get something, as I do, hey Beth, are you interested in this? I'm like, no, it's not great for me, but Joan's phenomenal. Joan's terrific. And I think you should talk to Joan. I met with her a couple of times. I think she's going to be great. And you enable their success. That I think is the best approach.
So that sounds an awful lot like something that we value tremendously in our community, which is we're looking for people who have a high DQ. You know, we have IQ, EQ, and DQ, or a decency quotient, where decency is fundamentally about bringing out the best from others, elevating them, and making them successful. So it sounds like you're already an honorary member of our community. So thank you for modeling that behavior. But I'm curious, how did you come to realize that it's not all about me in terms of having your own success really comes from when you make others successful? How did that light bulb go on?
Well, I mean, I think over time, I'm not the same person I was when I was 22. I'm in my mid 50s now. And so now I'm like, learn some hard lessons. And you can't say, well, you just got to go on the journey and then you're going to learn that lesson. But rather, I think to myself, when did that click with me? And, I go back to my mom telling me, I have a responsibility, but more, doesn't it always feel better when you help somebody else succeed than when you necessarily succeed yourself? It does to me. And I think some of the most joyous moments of my life, of my career, and recognizing this, I had a couple people. I was thinking of this young woman who was working for me when I was in publishing, and she was talking about, so maybe she's in her mid 20s, and she was like, I always thought I was going to be a doctor. I was like, well, why don't you go be a doctor? She goes, well, because, I said, it's not too late. You're smart. Why don't you go be a doctor? Go be a doctor. Now, I left that job and I went to 2 other jobs or whatever. And then it got announced on some other role. And she contacted me and she goes, you know what? I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor. I'm not kidding you. That makes me, it lights me up. And what I realized is why. And it's because, I helped her see herself as having that possibility. Isn't that great? And that makes it so much richer. And then the business success, really being able to help somebody from a business perspective and see the numbers cascade, because that, their success is your success in a business. That's, I think, where the light bulb went off for me.
Yeah. So speaking of trying to make other people successful, you are all too rare as a female CEO. And so how do we make more women successful and reduce these or increase what are now embarrassingly low numbers? And so we're doing a better job in business schools and creating a pipeline of talent that's close to gender equity. But what advice do you have for women, and what advice do you have for men in terms of making progress on this front?
Well, first of all, don't take yourself out of play early in your career. Life is a journey, and it is full of good stuff and bad stuff and failures and success and blah, blah, blah. And you should love all of it. You should embrace all of it. It is life's journey. How do you know when it's going to be joyous and successful, except for that you had the bad thing happen as well? You learn from it. Don't wear it as an anchor around your neck. You move on. Remember what I said, it's not about you, it's about somebody else. And want to have people understand that's the partner you are, and you'd be amazed. For women, there was been all sorts of analysis done. McKinsey did a study of women who just came out of school, and they were in corporate America, and maybe it's year 1. And so they were like, how many of you want to make it to the C-suite? How many of you want to do that? And it was like, let's say 40, 45%. Same thing for men, 40, 45%. About 2 years later, they went back and they asked the same people, so how are you thinking? And it had dropped to like mid-teens for women, and it was still in the 30-some% for men. And they said to the women, what happened? And they said they had a failure, and they didn't see any role models, and they judged themselves by that failure. And this is not unfamiliar to me. This is not dissimilar in terms of this personalization that women often have about a failure. It feels like sometimes a guy, it's like 5 requirements for a job. A guy's got one. He's like, I'm smarter than that dude who had the job. I'm ready. And a woman's like, I've only got 4 of the 5. And so I've got to wait and have all 5, right? And oh, I have this failure, they're going to find it. And you just can't judge yourself by that failure, by that issue. Instead, you have to say, I'm going to think about what I can do, what I am doing. I'm going to accept responsibility for any failure I have, but I'm going to look forward. I'm going to move on. Oftentimes, and I don't judge this, if it in your 30s, you're deciding you're going to get married, you're going to have a kid or 2, and you're like, I can't do the whole thing. I can't do the professional, and I'm going to step away. I'm going to take a staff job. And a lot of times you want to have a line job that has revenue responsibility, things like that, to get to the senior most levels. And you decide, well, I can't do that right now. Now, if you make a definitive choice, good on you. But don't decide you can't, because you can. I mean, I have 3 children. My wife is she was a West Point grad. She's a Columbia Law grad. She was the CEO of a hedge fund. And guess what? We figured it out. We just kind of we match calendars, who's there to watch the kids. And, it's messy. It's messy. Life is messy. That's the joy of it. And so it's hard sometimes. And it's, and we figure it out. And that's why I say women can take themselves out of play. And when you do that, and you do that early, it means your opportunity going forward.
So any, flipping that around, any advice for how
For
men
men.
can be better allies?
Well, they can be better allies, but listen, some of these same stressors are there for men now. There was always an expectation that the women had the responsibility for the kids, whatever. And guess what? Men have that now too. So I'm using this characterization, but I'm going to say the same thing to men. Don't take yourself out of play. Yes, you want to be a good ally. Ask yourself, can I go to the Women's Leadership Network ERG meeting? Do it, right? Be seen as an ally, learn. And women, you should want the men there. But men, I'm using these examples, but they are absolutely applicable to men right now, because guess what? There is a different expectation for men than when I was in my 20s and 30s. And so that you don't get a free pass, and I get that. So the way that you stand out is by the same rules that you hope your parents taught you. Be a good person, care about somebody else, do your best work, show up as your best self, try to do that every day. And don't be I was going to use a flavorful word, but this is being recorded. So just don't be a knucklehead. Okay. Try not to be a knucklehead, everybody. Because, oh my goodness, sometimes I see this and I'm like, really? Come on. What are you doing? What are you doing? And the other thing I would say is, don't be thinking that your career is linear. I love that you said from the start, you're not a linear thinker and a linear questioner. Thank you. Be interesting. Read broadly. Don't just be about your one topic that nobody cares about that. Instead, let's read everything. I'm reading everything and trying to take in all sorts of information to try to give myself a broader palette to paint from. But when you have confirmation bias, I'm only reading this guy or gal, it's not a good thing. It's not something that's going to distinguish you. And when you think more broadly, and instead of thinking that my career is going to be linear, I'm going to do this job, and then I'm going to be a director, and then I'm going to be vice president, and then I'm going to be a senior vice president, and then I'm going to be EVP. No, that's not the way my career went. 6 industries, including publishing, chemicals, consumer goods, food, ag, whatever. And I've taken sideways moves. I've taken, physical moves. All of these will make you a broader candidate and a better thinker, I think, to get to the top. The only other comment I make as best career advice is the most important decision you make and business decision you make is who you marry. And I'm serious about that, because, you have to have a good partner. Sometimes I say to my team, like, nobody cares more about your career than you do. And maybe your spouse does. And when you recognize that you need someone who sees you as you, who values you for you, who has that confidence in you, and who will work together with you in your career, that I think is the distinguisher. If you don't have that, if you have someone who's working against you, that's just not going to go well for you.
So, so you get to the top, and you discover that things are nonlinear, and that the job of being CEO is just more complicated than it used to be because of this crazy intersection between business and politics. And so, as you think about, you stepped into the role as CEO at the very time when farmers were being used as a political football, enmeshed in trade wars, tariffs. How did you navigate that? Because so many people have been caught up in these political issues and perceived to be taking sides. And I don't remember that ever becoming an issue for you as you navigated these challenges.
Well, first of all, I talk policy, I don't talk politics. I talk policy, not politics. Policy is absolutely critical to the health of the American farmer. Only 1.5% of the population is involved in agriculture. And yet they feed not only us, but a growing world population set to grow to 9.5 or 10 billion. So policy is a huge stabilizer and absolutely requirement for agriculture. I spend a lot of time in DC. I have a government affairs team. In fact, my chief of staff came from there. She's terrific and brilliant. And I do talk policy quite a bit. Now, it so happens in that 2018-19, I'm sure if you were doing background on me, you saw that I did a 60 Minutes piece with Leslie Stahl. And that was about farming and agriculture and the trade war. And from that, I did receive an invitation to go meet with the former president, and did so with many of my members, to my board chair and a couple of the others. And I'm always careful in those situations, that one, being with the president, but I've named the senator, National Governors Association. I've spoken with all of them and do that quite frequently because of the policy issues that are absolutely central to the profitability and the resilience of farming and agriculture in rural communities. So how do I do that? Well, because I talk to the right, I talk to the left, I'm not interested in that. That's not my discussion. My discussion is to talk about what I believe is absolutely critical for our members, for our farmers, communities, et cetera. And I say that a lot. Now, people will misinterpret, but I speak at very conservative areas. I speak at very liberal areas. We have to have all of them because, again, as I say to my own members, the House is comprised of 435 members. 35 are aligned with rural America and the agriculture. 400 are not. So we got to educate the other 400, and we have to have conversations that are robust. And that doesn't mean we're all going to agree. I don't know about what happens at your dinner table, but I can guarantee you we don't all agree at my dinner table. That doesn't mean I don't love my family. And so we're going to have some arguments. Back in the old days, that was okay. But now it seems like if you're either very polarized on the right or the left or something, and I just try to stay away from that. I talk policy.
So sometimes you're trying to run your business, and people try to politicize what you do. So here, the example would be your logo change, and some people concluding that that this was done for reasons which they find objectionable for one reason or another, and yet that wasn't what motivated the change, as I understand it.
No, and I apologize, I'm looking down just a minute. I'm sorry, your last question.
Yeah, so it was about the logo change.
Yeah.
That you got flack over that.
Well, I did, from both sides. That's when you know you're in the right place. When you're getting the energy from both sides. The reality is, when you become CEO, you look at everything. You look at businesses, as I did, and what do we have the right to win with? What are we the rightful owner? Let me look at the financials. Is the momentum case positive or negative? Do we need to think of the portfolio differently? At the same time, I did look at the packaging. And what I was seeing in terms of our core businesses was that some of the younger consumers were unfamiliar with Land O'Lakes, were unfamiliar with why is there the maiden on the package? What is that? And so when we did our research, and after that 60 Minutes piece, I heard a lot of, oh, I didn't know you were cooperative. I didn't know you were owned by farmers. If I'd have known this, I would have bought more of your products. So we looked at that, and then we did a number of things. We did a lot of consumer research, of course. Then we looked at different packaging, and we went to where our strength was. What's differentiating about our business is our cooperative model, our ownership by farmers and by ag retailers. And so we decided we needed to shout about that. We needed to really describe that. That to me was a business decision. When I made the call to do that, I had some say I was a big chicken and it was a PC thing to do. And then others say, yes, you're out there being a leader in this instance. And I was making a business decision. Now, I'm going to say the good news is we introduced the brand of Land O'Lakes to 8 million new households, and we've had record years since doing that. We can talk about whether that was, what was the dynamic. But, I push back a bit on everybody to say, you put your own narrative around these decisions. And that was not my narrative. My narrative was I have a responsibility as the CEO of this business to make sure it has another 100 years. In farming, and especially in dairy farming, if they don't have market access, meaning a place to ship their milk, they don't have a business. Resilience of this model is very challenging. I'm not going to get into all the reasons why. The federal order pricing model, the commodity price deterioration, the strength of the dollar, the trade environment, the regulatory environment. I could give you chapter and verse, and we could sit here and have a very robust discussion. But what I need to do is excite consumers about who we are and the quality of our products. And that is the reason I made that change.
So shifting into some of these other considerations and staying away from politics and focusing on policy, how do you feel about the passage of this bipartisan infrastructure bill? I think there's some elements of that where you're very passionate and you see this as something that has real potential.
I'm thrilled. We have been advocating we've taken the lead with about 175, 180. I'm trying to think what the number is now. Other companies, other organizations focused on closing the digital divide. This was something we started a year and a half ago when I recognized, hundreds of rural hospitals have shut down. What's going to happen if COVID goes to the rural areas? We need telemedicine. So I sent letters to a number of governors and asked for, regulatory variances about being able to see a doctor in virtually and have a prescription written, about having reimbursement rates for doctors increased to the same level as an in-person meeting, about cross-border access for mental health providers or for other providers. We partner with the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, the University of Minnesota, and a number of hospitals, but also many corporations, Microsoft, Cisco, you name it, to advocate for these things. And now there's more telemedicine appointments in one day than there were in a whole year beforehand. I mean, it's so exciting. So this investment that this ACP group was focused on needing at least 80 billion, 60 to 80 to $100 billion of investment to close this digital divide. I said, we need to have this be like the Rural Electric Initiative in the 1930s, grow across the country and close this divide. This should be a right. It's like mail delivery. It's like electricity. And if we don't do this, it leaves us all less secure. It really does leave us all less secure. It's about opportunity. I'm not talking about streaming Netflix. I'm talking about access to education and job creation. job creation in rural areas have lagged because who's starting a business in a town that has no technology? Nobody's starting a business there, nobody's staying. So this bill is huge. I have been in Senate meetings, House meetings, I've been at the administration. I mean, I could not be more thrilled. I was just with the Commerce Secretary a week or two ago. She and I were talking about this very particular issue. We were doing an event for Fortune, and I am thrilled. Now, what happens in real life? In real life, you don't finish like, oh, we got the money, right? Because really, how's it going to be implemented? And state by state, county by county, it's different. Regulatory frameworks, state by state, are different. So we also then, as a follow-on, started the American Connection Fellows. These are young people, like probably listening here, who can go back, who have college degrees, can go back to their town, have a fellowship for 2 years, be a tech fellow, take the baton, understand what ISP providers to partner with, be like the chamber, an upcoming chamber of commerce, and really work towards implementation, because where these things fall apart is execution. And so that's what we're focused on right now, this next step.
So many questions and so little time. We have 2 minutes left. And so one last question, which is, you said you've changed over time. What advice would you give to your younger self based on what you've learned?
I think, again, it's not all about you. That's what I've learned. It's not all about you. It's about others. Remind what your mom said. Your mom continues to be wise. She raised 8 of you, and she did it. It felt like, and take your mom's advice. I think the other thing I say is, please go on life's journey. Life is bumpy and messy and hard and sad and joyous and all of it. And you need to embrace all of it. Be intellectually curious. Think about broad thoughts. Don't be so linear or just so focused on one thing. It's not interesting. The broader you can make yourself, the more you would continue to invest in yourself and in your, using intellectual curiosity, the better you're going to be, and the more joyous your life is. So that's what I would say to my younger self. Don't be one note, and be about other people.
Okay, so I think you probably also should have said, you're on this, you're going to be great. And in fact, thank you for demonstrating to our community exactly what it means to be a leader of consequence. And we're just so grateful that you took the time to be with our community. Look forward to the day when we get you on campus. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you. I'm a big admirer of Duke, and as I was mentioning to you before we jumped on this thing, I got to come down to your campus because I do have twin 16-year-old sons, and one of them wants to see Duke, so I'm coming down there, and I'll let you know when I'm heading your direction.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.